There we go.
There we go. Okay. Sorry, should have done that before we took the sign away. Hi, I'm Deeanne Gist, and I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm really excited about our party and the fact that we're going to be able to visit with Cullen, and not with them, but talk about Cullen and Della, and it happened at the fair, and anything else you want to ask me about. Before we get started, I thought that I would tell you a little bit about what to expect in the format. The first thing I want to point out to you, if you haven't found this already, do you see that little chat window underneath the video screen? That's where you're going to talk to me. And if you have any questions, you're going to put those in there, or comments, and we're going to collect all those, and then throughout the evening I will answer them. And that's also really important because that's how you become eligible for winning the gift cards, is by commenting or asking questions in that little bar. So make sure that you do that. Also, in order to avoid confusion, I wanted to make sure that you understood that there's two names for the Chicago World's Fair. The World's Colombian Exposition is its official name, but the nickname is the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. So if I say one or the other, I'm really talking about both. So I just wanted to let you know about that. Towards the end, we're going to talk about we're going to announce the winner of the mini iPad, so I'm really excited about that. And good luck, everyone. And when the party is over, we're going to be putting the link to this party up so that people, if you have some friends who couldn't come to the party, they can still come and see what went on, or if you have to leave early or something like that. And because I'm not really sure who all's going to join us later, I thought that it might be a good idea to kind of explain what It Happened at the Fair was all about. So I'm going to give you just a little bitty snippet right here about the book. So here we go. It Happened at the Fair. It's about a young inventor who goes to the 1893 Chicago World's Fair to unveil his new invention. But what happens is when he gets into Machinery Palace, it is so noisy that he can't understand the people who are viewing his exhibit. So he goes over to the woman's building and asks the teacher of the deaf to tutor him in the art of lip reading. And let me just say here that in order to learn to lip read, you have to stare at your teacher's lips for a very long time. And what ends up happening is the two become attracted to each other. And this is a problem because the hero has big plans and he has a girl back home. So that's what It Happened at the Fair is about. So now you know about the book. And some people have submitted questions in advance, and we've kind of peppered those throughout the kind of party so that we can answer those, as many of those as I possibly can. And I thought we would start out with Judith's question, which was, the storyline for It Happened at the Fair is so unique. Where did you get the idea from? Well, I didn't really know when I decided on the Chicago World's Fair. I thought that it was like a carnival on steroids, but that's not at all what it was. It was actually this huge show and tell where the whole world came to Chicago to display their latest and their greatest. And it covered, as you can see in this picture, more than 600 acres. And after researching this, I think it would have taken me a week just to see everything in one of those buildings, much less the whole fair. I mean, look at that picture. It's almost like a small city with buildings and canals and trains and boats. And it also had its own amusement section called the Midway Plaisance. And although the whole fair was a jumble of nations and cultures from all over the world, it was right here on the Midway Plaisance where folks really cut loose. They had a dancer who was called Little Egypt, and she introduced America to the belly dance. And back then it was known as the Hoochie Coochie. And she was on the Midway Plaisance. And her performances were always packed, scandal or not. They also had a beauty show called Four Ladies from 40 Nations, which the men flocked to in droves. And it was basically just 40 women, their most beautiful women from each of the nations, kind of sitting there cordoned off, and the men would just walk by and gawk at them. but the centerpiece of the Midway, and really of the whole fair, was the giant Ferris wheel. And the reason we even had a Ferris wheel was because the Paris Exposition had taken place just 4 years earlier, and it had unveiled for the very first time the Eiffel Tower as its centerpiece. Well, Chicago being Chicago, they did not want to be outdone, so they accepted George Washington Ferris's wild idea for the world's first Ferris wheel, and boy, was it a doozy. They didn't sit back then in these little park benches and dangle their feet over the edge as they rose into the air the way we do. No, each car, it was a screened-in cabin about the size of a railroad car, and it held up to 40 people, and you had to pay 50 cents, and then that would give you 2 revolutions, and it was so huge that it took 20 minutes just to make those 2 revolutions. So now you have some facts about it happened at the fair, and some of them you knew from reading the book, and some of you didn't. And I see here we have a question that says, would you have ridden that first Ferris wheel at the fair? And, I think I would have if I could have afforded the 50 cents. But I'm not a thrill seeker by nature. However, all of my kids are, and so is my husband. And when we first went to Disney World, our youngest was just shy of 42 inches, which is really what you needed to be in order to get on all the big rides. So we bought him these heel lifters that you slip inside tennis shoes, and it gives you like an extra ½ inch. And so we went to Splash Mountain, which was their favorite ride, and I guess he had just sunk into his shoes or something. And so they measured him, and he wasn't quite 42 inches. So he and I went around the corner and then flipped the heel lifts over, put him back on, came back, measured him again. He was 42 inches, and the guys kind of look at us. But here's a picture of all of us on Splash Mountain. Now you might notice that all of us have matching shirts except for Greg. And that is because we have 4 kids, and I felt like it would be easier for me to spot them and keep track if I wasn't having to look for each individual face. I could just look at shirts, and so we were all going to wear the same shirts, but Greg was way too cool to wear the same shirt as everyone else, and so he refused. But when we got out of Splash Mountain, this is right after we put those heel lifts in Tyler's shoes. There was an officer there, but he was just a cast member, and he said, "Aren't you too little to go on Splash Mountain?" And fortunately, our daughter is just like, "No, we've been 4 times." And he was like, 4 times. So he gave her a citation for having way too much fun. All right. So that was a kind of long answer for what I ride a Ferris wheel. But anyway, I thought that one of the things that we could do to give you a chance to enter in for the giveaways, if you can't think of a question to ask me, is I thought we would just play a trivia game. Some of these questions you're going to know if you've read the book, and some of them you won't because they weren't included in the book. So this is not a competition. There's no stress or pressure. We're just going to do this for fun. I'm going to ask you some true or false questions, and so you need to type true or false in the little chat window. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. Here's the first one. True or false? Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show was an attraction at the fair. True or false? That was kind of a trick question. So if you put true, you get it right, and if you put false, you get it right. And the reason is because Buffalo Bill applied to be an exhibit at the fair, but the powers that be thought that might be a little bit too lowbrow, so they wouldn't let him in. So what he did was he set up his Wild West show right outside of the Midway Plaisance entrance, and he made a killing. Tons of crowds came, and he did not have to share one single percentage with the fair. So that was good for Buffalo Bill and a big mistake for the organizers of the fair. So true or false, you got it right. All right, ready for question number 2? Okay, here we go. Here's number 2. True or false? Chicago is called the Windy City because of the wind that whips off Lake Michigan. That's actually false. A lot of people think that, but the way Chicago got that nickname was when the U.S. decided to have a World's Fair. New York really wanted it in their town, and Chicago really wanted it in their town, and so they really got competitive, and Chicago was so long-winded during the congressional sessions while they were lobbying for it that the New Yorkers started calling Chicago the Windy City. And so that's where the nickname came from, and it stuck. So if you said false, you were right. Okay, let's do one more. Last one for now. True or false? When the World Fair closed, the buildings were turned into government offices. All right, the answer to that was also false. From the very beginning, the buildings were temporary, and they planned to just, completely demolish them. And the reason is because they didn't have very much time to put the fair together. By the time New York and Chicago was through arguing about who got the fair, Chicago then had to decide where they were going to do it. And really the best place was Jackson Park. The problem was Jackson Park is a swamp, or was a swamp, and was completely underwater. So they hired the landscape architect who did Central Park to come in and fill up the swamp and get it all ready and landscape the entire World's Fair. And by the time he was finished doing that and making his canals and doing all his stuff, they had no time to make the buildings. So basically what they did was they built just these wooden frames, and they sprayed them with this plaster of Paris concoction, and they didn't even have time to paint the buildings, so they just left them white, and that's why it was called the White City. And it ended up being really impressive, all these white cities, but the original plan had been to paint them. All right, here's a question coming through. Are any of the landmarks from the fair still in Chicago? If so, could you visit them today? Well, the only permanent building of the entire fair was the Palace of Fine Arts. And that one was built with brick, and it was fireproofed. And the reason was because it housed all those priceless pieces of art from around the world. So today it's called the Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry. So if you have been in the Science of Museum and Industry in Chicago, then you have been in one of the World's Fair buildings. So I think that's pretty exciting. Now I did want to tell you about this wonderful organization that is just formed called Friends of the White City, and it is a group dedicated to educating the public about the 1893 Colombian Exposition, and it's also they're trying to preserve what remains of the World's Fair in the way of documents, artifacts, personal memories, buildings, memorabilia, anything. And I think that it is their plan I know they've applied to be a nonprofit, and they eventually want to become a museum. So that's pretty exciting. You can find them on Facebook at Friends of the White City, and they also have a fan page. Type in 1893 World's Colombian Exposition, and I'm a member of both of those and a big supporter, so let's go over and give them some support. All right, there are lots of questions coming through, and we're going to take some that we're going to kind of stop and take a look at some of those. Now here's one more that came in advance that I want to share with you. And this question was, where do you do your writing? Well, I do it right here, and I'm in what some people would call a sunroom. And the reason is because there's a wall of windows here and a wall of windows here. Behind me is a ceiling to floor bookshelves, and then over there is my only one wall. So if I got out of my chair and went directly to the left, that's where I would be, right there. And because I love the sunshine, that's why I have all these windows. And I also tried to bring in some of the outdoors inside by painting a mural with honeybees and birds and vines and berries. And so that goes all the way around the room. I also have a very strict dress code. I have to work in comfy clothes and my froggy slippers. The problem is, because I wear my froggy slippers to work every day, I completely wore them out. But I am happy to report that I got some new piggy slippers for Mother's Day. So I am all set. I also have this huge obnoxious monitor that my man bought for me because I was getting terrible migraines from squinting and hunching over my computer as I work. You'll notice right over there the stool that I keep handy if I need to get any of my books from the upper bookshelves. I also have a footstool under my desk since my feet don't exactly touch the floor. And on that one wall that doesn't have any windows is an old mercantile bin from the mid-1800s. It's a potato bin, and I use it for my files and my office supplies. So now you've had a personal tour of my office, and let's look at some of these new questions. Kristen says, did you always want to be a writer? Well, when I wasn't playing Barbies, the answer is no. When I wasn't playing Barbies, I was playing school. I wanted to be a school teacher, and I did go to Texas A&M and get my education degree. And then I had 4 babies in 4 years and stayed home and read voraciously and became a journalist. And then while I was doing the journalism, I wrote my first book. And so that's kind of how I got into it. Laura asks, do you write full time or do you have a day job? And I am blessed to write full time. I do this all day long. I do not know how people who have a day job get their books done. They're so prolific. I'm so in awe of them. Okay, here's one from Jenny L. She says, do you have any writing rituals? And I am one of those writers. In the writing world, we call them plotters or pantsers. And pantsers are people who write by the seat of their pants. So they just sit down and they start typing. I cannot do that. I have to know exactly where I'm going from point A to point B to point C, all the way to Z. So I may not know how I get from point A to point B, but I definitely know what point B is when I'm in point A, and I head that direction. So the only pantser part is that getting from one point to the other, but I definitely know where I'm going here and where I'm going to end up over there. So I definitely have those kind of rituals. Another thing that I have that I was going to show you is I have a book that I keep, and inside it is everything that has to do with my book. And I've scanned some pages for you so you could kind of see. Oops, I clicked on the wrong thing. Let me find them. Here we go. If you open that up, you'll see that I have color-coded what each section is for, and the very first page is the ABCs, because every time I name a character, I write that name by the letter so that I can see if I have a whole bunch of people with the first name B, so it just kind of keeps me from getting confused there. I also have a section in there for the heroine and the hero, and I have a collage of as many different photos and expressions as I can get of my hero and heroine. I also have try to look like for buildings. This is where Cullen and Della, this is Harville House where they stayed, and the yellow window is Cullen's window and the pink window is Della's window, and I have the floor plan to that building, and I know everything about that building where they stayed, even though the name Harville House is fictional. I also have a section where I keep places where they frequent. In this case, they go to the Blucher's chocolate, the cocoa house a whole lot. And this is a picture of that so that I could have in my mind what that was a picture of. And then on the last page, I have a calendar of 1893 so that I know what day 4th of July is on, and and I also keep track of when the fair is and what they're doing and how everything's going. So that's a question about how I do my writing. There were several questions like that, so I kind of lumped all of those into one. Okay, Amy wants to know, if you weren't a writer, what would you be doing? Well, I would be doing something, because I have a condition called ideaphoria, and that's a real condition, and it's not a bad condition. It just means that I have ideas all the time. They come all the time about all kinds of things. And so here's a little cartoon that my daughter sent me about that. But I have done an antique business, I have done Amway, I have done 900 numbers, I have done chain letters, I have done all kinds of things. One of my more productive things was I have a parenting line of products that shows children how to do their chores without being reminded or reprimanded, and it's called I Did My Chores, and you can find out about that at ididmychores.com. But I can guarantee you that if I wasn't writing, I would be doing something. Now, we're going to jump back from the questions for a minute, and I want to talk about opening day at the fair. If you have read It Happened at the Fair, what did you think of opening day? Was that crazy? And yet it really, really was that packed. I have a picture, and there was a picture of this in the book. I can't remember if it was also in the ebook, because there were different images in the book than there were in the ebook. But this really does depict how crowded it was in front of the presidential platform on opening day. And I don't know how well you can see this image, but it actually came from a stereoscopic card. Now, do you remember those viewfinders that we used to look at that had 3D images? Well, the Victorians had something very similar, and it was called a stereoscope. And I have one that I wanted to show you. And this is what it is. You look through here, and then you put the card right here. And that card, I'll see if I can show it to you. Here it is. Do you see how it's split down the middle so that it can be 3D? So then, when I put it in here, then I look through here, and oh my gosh, every time I look at this, I am so astounded. I wish you could see in here, because seeing all of those, it's like a bunch of bobbleheads, and there's just tons and tons and tons, and they go, where's that image again so you can see it? They go all the way to Lake Michigan. It is just crazy. And if you'll recall, those of you who have read It Happened in the Fair, that this opening crowd is where Cullen and Della meet. And as you know, Cullen was an inventor, and he had come to the exposition to unveil his invention, which was an automatic fire sprinkler system. But he wasn't the only one there with an invention. There were lots and lots of people there with inventions. And there was one building in particular that was called the Electricity Building. And we were just as a nation beginning to harness electricity. And let me see, I have a picture for you right here of the electricity. This is inside the Electricity Building. And all kinds of crazy ways to use electricity were inside this building, including Thomas Edison's Tower of Light. And this is an 82-foot tower. Now, you think about 82 feet. 2 stories is like 24 feet. So an 82-foot tower of lights. It had 1,800 lights on it, and they were all choreographed to the Blue Danube Waltz. Now, not everybody at the fair was showing inventions. Some people just wanted to show off the commodities and natural resources from their nations or the states here in the U.S. And so they tried, because everyone was doing this, they tried their best to make their display the most enticing. And so they would construct these really elaborate pavilions inside that were inside these enormous buildings. And some people, like this producer of stoves, they had less ostentatious pavilions than the one we just looked at. But still, I think this was pretty elaborate. And then others, like this saddlery hardware maker, he just simply had display cases. And this one, I don't know if you can really tell from this picture, but this paper manufacturer was very clever because this entire pavilion was made out of paper. So there were all kinds of exhibits and displays and types of entertainment at the fair. And one of the questions coming through is, what would you make sure you saw if you visited in the fair in 1893? And that's like asking me what my favorite Bible verse is. I have no idea. There were so many exhibits. I couldn't even decide what to put in the book, barely. And so I'm really glad that we're having this party so that I have time to share with you some of the more fun exhibits that I didn't get a chance to touch on in the book. And I will tell you that some of the most enchanting things that I found about the fair was that it's called a fair of firsts. And that's because so many new products that are household names today, they debuted at this fair. And an example would be Cracker Jacks. Now, they weren't called Cracker Jacks till the turn of the century, but the Cracker Jack Company made their caramel corn and debuted it at the fair. It was a huge hit. Aunt Jemima syrup was brand new, debuted at the fair. The zipper, there had never been a zipper, that debuted at the fair. And one of the most exciting ones, I think, were picture postcards. There had never been picture postcards before until the fair, and they just became wildly popular. Before this time, what people did if they wanted some kind of souvenir was they would get a lithograph, or they would get a drawing or a painting or a sketch, or, of course, later a photograph. Or they would have a souvenir, and I brought a souvenir with me to show you. Now, this is a chatelaine. I know that it's kind of hard to see, but what this is I'm hoping that you can you see that little hook right here? This would hook onto a lady's waist line, her waist belt or her belt. And from it, this chatelaine would hang charms. Now, these charms could be anything. It could be a button hook, a fan, a dance card, just all kinds of things. In this particular one, it has a travel theme on it. And so this one is a compass. I'm going to see if I can bring it close so you can see it. Can you see that? That's a little compass. And then she has her little handy-dandy magnifying glass so that she could see her compass. But this was the souvenir that I was wanting to show you. And here it is up close. It says souvenir. And then when you unhook it and you open it up, look, it has all these little images. Can you see those? And I think I might have had it upside down. I'm not really sure. And if I had given you time enough to look at it, you would see that those images were of Paris. But the Eiffel Tower wasn't in there, which tells me that that particular charm predates the 1889 Paris Exposition. So picture postcards were definitely a big, big deal, and an entire industry was born. This particular postcard was of the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And what Spain did was they made exact replicas of these three ships, and they sailed them from Spain, where Columbus left, all the way to the Chicago World's Fair. And they had to leave a year in advance in order to get to the fair on time. So they left in Spain, those three ships, the summer of 1892. They arrived at the fair in the summer of 1893, and as you can imagine, there were thousands of cheering people there to greet them. And once again, so many pages and so many exhibits and so few pages. I just couldn't include them all. So I'm really glad that we're getting to do that here. All right, let's do a few more questions. Here's some more questions. Rachel wants to know, is your husband your inspiration for your male characters or heroes?
He said, of course.
Hey, Greg, let's see if we can get him in here. Greg, come here. Are you in the middle? Are you in the middle of your room?
He's coming.
You want to come answer this question? Come sit down. Come sit down right here, baby. Come sit down. Okay, you're too tall. He's 6'5". Okay, there he is. Okay.
Hello.
This is Greg. He's all embarrassed. Now here's your question. Is your husband your inspiration for your male characters and heroes?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. I used to have long, flowing blonde hair, and used to have a part-time job. I'm an engineer, and I used to be called Fabio.
Fabio!
Oh, Fabio. Sorry. All right, I think that's enough.
You did good, baby. He's such a good sport, isn't he? He's in the middle of making gumbo, so I wasn't sure if he was doing his roux. We wouldn't have seen him if he was doing his roux, but I will tell you that he is quite right. And Gail, I have my assistant Gail is here, and she's pulling.
I told him I was your boss and your sister.
Oh, she's told you, I see, that she's my boss and my sister. And as my sister, she has access to all kinds of photos that are popping up over here. And here is one of Greg and I when we were courting. We were in our probably 21 here. And now let's get me out of the picture. And now you tell me if he's the inspiration for my male characters. I'm telling you what, that's what I'm talking about. Greg is like, what picture is up there? Bless his heart. All right. Question from Susie. What is something most people don't know about you? I've just now been telling this story. I'd totally forgotten about it. My sister reminded me of it. When I was in high school, I weighed like I weighed 89 pounds when I graduated high school. I had no figure whatsoever. I looked like I was 12, and I was always teased. And there was this guy in speech class that always teased me, and just mercilessly. So when it was time to do a demonstration speech, I decided that I would ask him to be my volunteer. So I called him up here, up to the front of the room, and I did a speech on how to tie a person up. And so I tied him to that school chair. I put a rope around his neck and down through the chair and to his feet, so that if he pulled his feet out, it would choke him. And so he literally could not move. And once I had him completely tied up, I announced that it wasn't really a speech on how to tie a person up. It was really a speech on how to throw a pie in someone's face. And I put a shower curtain around his neck, and I put a shower cap on him so he wouldn't mess up his hair. And I stood right beside him, and and there really is an art to doing that. You can't leave the pie in the tin or it hurts, and you can't bake a real pie or that will hurt. So you just get a crust, and then you fill it with whipped cream. And I was filling it, and the teacher's like, I think that's enough. So then I stood right beside him with this big old thing and went over all and told them all how to throw a pie in someone's face. And I said, but the most important thing is to catch them by surprise. And then it went over, and then I left. I went straight from there. I picked up my purse. I walked out of class and left. And I have no idea who untied him, who cleaned him up. I have no idea. But he quit teasing me. So that, Susie, is something that not too many people know. What shoes are you wearing? Well, hang on. Woo! There they are. My piggies. I told you those were my work shoes. All right, and one more. Mary Kay asks, did you write any of yourself into Della's characters? And if I did, I didn't do it intentionally. I'm sure I do, and we could bring my sister in here, and she would be able to tell you, but back, stay right over there. We're not going there. So I'm sure I did, but I don't do it intentionally. I try and make them their very own person. Okay, now after all of these pictures that we've seen of the World's Fair, you may think that this was kind of a testosterone-driven event, but really women were showcased for the very first time here in a really, really special way. Now, you need to keep in mind, we don't have the right to vote at this point, and this was the first time that Congress, I have a picture of these girls, and I want to, okay, here we go, that Congress established a board of lady managers to organize and oversee a woman's building where not one single thing was made by the hand of a man, but only women. So in this woman's building, all of the exhibits were by women, the frescoes were by women, the sculptures were by women, the paintings were by women, all of the books in the library were written by women, and then last but not least, the architect was a woman. And the way that they found the architect was they just had a contest, and they put out a contest asking any woman architect, because of course there weren't very many, to submit plans for a woman's building. And the girl who won was a 23-year-old girl named Sophia Hayden, and this was her very first project after graduating from MIT. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? All before we had the right to vote. And I will tell you that Rome wasn't built in a day, and the stereotypes for women were still very prevalent, even within the women who were a part of the woman's building. Because look at this. Now, if you've read the book, you would have seen this. And this picture, I'm pretty sure, is in both the print and the ebook, because it was just too delicious to pass up. This is a kitchen garden, which took place in the children's building, which was run in conjunction with the woman's building. And in this kitchen garden, these little girls would demonstrate the womanly arts of cooking and cleaning and housekeeping to fairgoers who would wander in and watch them. Now, as you'll recall, our heroine Della worked in this children's building, and she had accompanied her entire school of deaf children who had come to the fair as a living exhibit, so the fairgoers could see how deaf preschoolers learned to lip read. Now, Gertie wants to know if it happened at the fair, is part of a series, and if it is, what is that book about and when does it release? And the answer, Gertie, is yes. We're going to have 3 books that have a tie-in to the Chicago World's Fair. It Happened at the Fair is the only one that's going to really, we camped in that fair. We experienced that fair. The next 2 books will incorporate the fair, but they're not going to be quite as fair driven. However, home base for the next, my 2014 book is going to be the Woman's Building. And if you have had a chance to read my short story, I have featured in Tempest in the White City the protagonist, the hero and the heroine for our 2014 book. And you can get this short story for 99 cents. It's only available electronically, except for right now. Walmart has an exclusive edition of It Happened at the Fair with the short story printed in the back, and it's a limited edition, and it's only while supplies last. So if you want a print version of that, the book has already been out for almost a month now, so you're going to need to get to Walmart pretty quick. I don't know how many of those they still have left, but it'll say Walmart exclusive up in the corner. Okay, Kathy says, should I read Tempest in the White City, the short story, before I read the book? It happened at the fair, or after? And it doesn't matter because Tempest in the White City is for the 2014 book. And really, you could even read the 2014 book and the short story after it. It doesn't really matter what order you read anything in. They all have a little standalone story within each of them. So you're safe. Good question. All right, you ready for another trivia game? You want to do that for a little bit? Okay. If you came in late, I want to call your attention to that little chat window underneath the video. And in there, right now, we're going to play a trivia game. And you write true or false in that chat window. And when you do, it will make you eligible for some of the gift cards. You may be seeing some chat that says, so-and-so won a Starbucks gift card. Well, that's how you become eligible for that, is by entering a question or a comment or by participating in our trivia game. All right, so here's our trivia quiz. First one, you ready? True or false? Alexander Graham Bell was a prominent advocate for the deaf. Okay, the answer to that is true. And the reason is because Alexander Graham Bell's wife and mother were both deaf. So even though he invented the telephone, he was a very, very big advocate for the deaf. And here's a picture of him with Helen Keller, whom he was very good friends with, and with whom he's escorted along with Anne Sullivan as they toured the fair. All right, you ready for number 2? Okay, here we go. Number 2. True or false? Della was willing to help Cullen overcome his increasing deafness by any means possible, including teaching him both lip reading and sign language. This is another trick question. If you wrote true, you get it right, and if you wrote false, you get it right. And the reason is because sign language at this time in our country's history was very controversial. And the reason is because the Civil War, it wasn't even, 30 years hadn't even passed. So our country was really obsessed with united we stand, divided we fall. And they wanted to make sure that we were united. And what they ended up convincing themselves was that united meant that we were all the same. And so they quit paying attention to individuality and what we were like on the inside, and just started paying attention to what we were on the outside. And they wanted everyone to be the same. And signing set apart a deaf person in a very visible and obvious way. So what these advocates did, and they were being benevolent, they thought they were really trying to help the deaf. And they said, well, what we need to do is just eradicate sign language off the planet. And the way they felt like they could do this was to teach deaf children from birth to lip read only. And so they would pull them in at age 2 to these preschools where they would not teach them sign language, only lip reading. Well, Cullen was very fascinated with sign language, and he wanted to learn it, and he pushed and he pushed and he pushed. And as Della grows, she realized the value of the sign language, because sign language is one of the deaf community's heritage. It's their inheritance, and it's very important for them. And so so that's one of the things that Della did towards the end. So false in that she only taught him lip reading at the beginning. True in that she taught him both sign and lip reading toward the end. All right, let's do one more trivia question. Last one. Here we go. True or false? All Colombian Guard candidates, now the Colombian Guards were the corps of men in charge of police duty at the fair. So all Colombian Guard candidates were subjected to a critical test before being appointed. They had to furnish proof of good character, ability, and habits. They had to be at least 5'8", of good physique, and not less than 21, nor more than 35. True or false? Yes, that was true, as you can imagine. This was a very elite force of men. They selected the men based on their physicality, their mentally and morally, so that they would physically, mentally, and morally be ready for the work that they would be required of them at the fair. And they were 5'8" isn't much for us, but back then that was huge. People were shorter back then, so 5'8" was a very tall. So all of these guards were very tall. And as I mentioned earlier, our hero in my 2014 book is a Colombian guard, but he's much better looking than that guy in the picture. Do you want a little sneak peek of him? I have an artist, Monica Bruines, who drew a sketch of Hunter Scott for me. So there's Hunter, who will be our 2014 hero and Colombian guard. Okay, I think we have time. Let's see. Yeah, we're good. We have time for a few more questions. All right. Can you lip read like Della? I wish I could. That would be so amazing. I can't. I did a lot of researching on lip reading, and I practiced and tried to do what Cullen did as he practiced in the mirror, and it just was very time consuming. And then I contacted someone, and they told me that it takes years to learn and lots of practice, and even then it's not a precise art, because if someone has a beard, or they mumble, or they have an accent, or they're in a profile, there's a lot of things that make it difficult to lip read. Okay, what draws you to writing historical fiction? I think the thing that appeals to me about writing and reading historical fiction is that things were just slower and simpler, it seems like, back then. I read to escape the busy things and my humongous to-do list and going here and going there, and I love the historicals because time just seemed to move a little slower back then. And yet what's so really neat is that they were still so relevant, because it doesn't matter if we're talking about a biblical character, a medieval character, or somebody at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. They are still struggling with the same issues that we struggle with today. And so even though I'm reading a historical, it is so relevant to what's happening today. So I think that that's why I enjoy reading them and I enjoy writing them. Plus, I love those pretty dresses. Aren't those awesome? I'm really fascinated with the hats and the chatelaines and the dresses and the carriages, just all of it. It all just seems so romantic to me. I'm sure if I had to wear that corset all day long, I would not feel romantic at all. All right, question from Pam S. She asks, how long did this book take you to research? I thought the little details were so interesting. Thank you. And it takes me a year to write every book, as you know. And my writing schedule, I turn in my manuscript to the publisher on September 1st. I'm supposed to. And then I spend 6 months researching. And then I spend the next 6 months writing. And I have a, right here is, here's an historic guidebook, a McNally guidebook to the fair that was written in 1893. And I know you can't really see this, but I read this whole entire book and even had to coil bind it because it was falling apart. And when I read it, I'm going to show you. Do you see? I'm making these little notes in the margin. Well, I make these notes on every single page. And then I send these to my sweet, wonderful, amazing, awesome assistant and sister, Gail, who puts all of these comments, every single comment. So if it says, this one says convent collection, she'll put convent collection, she'll put page 113 and the title of the book, and that it had to do with Columbus, and then that way, if I'm writing the book and I go, I know I read in one of these books behind me about the convent, and I just don't remember what book and what page. I go to that Excel spreadsheet, I do a search for convent, and it tells me to go to A Week at the Fair, page 113. I turn to it, I find what I need, and I'm off. So that is huge. I used to do that by myself, and now that Gail is with me, she does that for me, and it is a tremendous help. And it allows me then to pull all those details in. Okay, next question. How many of the details were true, and how much was your imagination? I tried to, most all of them were true. The only thing that I would bend, as far as details about the World's Fair, the only thing I bent was the timeline. And I did put at the very back of the book, there's a pretty extensive author's note. And if you read that, it will tell you exactly what was true and what wasn't, and where I fudged, if I fudged. But for the most part, I held very, very true to the details specific to the fair. Now, the Cullen and Della story was completely fabricated. I totally made all that up. But the vignettes around them, those were true. Okay, and now we've got some that are kind of hot off the press. Hannah says, Deanne, I read that on the book cover, the model has a bug on her shoulder. How did the bug make the cut for the cover? Hand me, would you hand me a book? Yeah.
And I
You have one right there? Of course. She just happens to have one. She's awesome. Okay. It happened at the fair. Is an amazing cover. And I don't know how well you can see this, but right there is a bug. And that's not supposed to be there. And that's just one of those flukes. And the book had already gone to press, come off the press, and when it does that, they'll grab one, stuff it in an envelope, and ship it to me so that I can see it right when it comes off the press. Well, a couple days after I got it and was just like, oh, it's so beautiful, I love it, my editor calls, and she says, Dee, do you remember when Christina Dodd had that cover that had 3 arms on her heroine? I'm like, you could forget that. Yes, I do remember that. She goes, well, do you see anything unusual about your cover? And I immediately was like, oh my goodness. And I went and I looked, and she had all her limbs, so that was good. And then I saw it pretty quick after that, and was like, oh my gosh, that's hilarious. What happened? And nobody knows. It just is one of those things. And you would not believe how many desks this goes across before it goes to press. And the same thing with the edits. No matter how many proofs we do, there is always an error. It just never fails. But it was actually on her sleeve during the photo shoot, and nobody ever noticed. So, all right. Rebecca says, do you know if Helen Keller agreed with not teaching deaf children sign language? That's a great question, Rebecca. I never saw anything in writing anywhere where she said one or the other. Now, she, of course, had to use, she couldn't lip read. She did the thing where she felt people's nose and kind of put her hand on them, and then she would sign she would have Anne Sullivan or whoever she was talking to, they would sign in Helen's hand, and that's how she would read sign language and listen. Let's see. Tanya wants to know, how do you decide on character names? And basically what I do is I collect old yearbooks. So I have these old yearbooks from long time ago. See? And these old yearbooks have the best names ever. Ora Lou, just all kinds of wonderful names. And so that's what I do. I just grab these books and I look through them until I find a name that I think will fit those in my story. I don't know how to say your name, Selena. Selena. Do you ever base any of your characters on people you have known in real life? No, I don't. Although I did get a text from my daughter who, when I was talking about, when I researched, let me start over. When I researched inventors, I found out that one of the things that they had in common, because I make a backstory for Cullen so that I know from birth to the first page everything that happens to him. I have a whole life that I've made up for him. And that way I know what baggage he comes to the first page with. And so the way I do that is I just research inventors from that time. And what I found was that all the inventors were very curious. They were always asking questions, always asking questions. Well, I have a daughter who always asks questions. Now, she's not an inventor, but she has that idea for you the way I do. But she would ask questions like, all the time in the car. Does the sun have a shadow? Do snakes have eyelids? Who thought up math? I mean, just question after question. Well, I incorporated that into Cullen's thing and I put it in the book, and she was reading it and she took a snapshot of it and texted it to me and said, I see I'm going to have to start copywriting my thoughts. So I don't ever, all the characters are fictional. I would get in big trouble if I did that, unless it's somebody like Alexander Graham Bell or Helen Keller, someone like that. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Who were the film stars that you had in mind when you created Cullen and Della? Y'all have been asking me this, and I've been putting you off because I didn't use celebrities this time. Almost always I use celebrities for inspiration, and that's because I need to be consistent in my mind of what they look like and what kind of different expressions they have and what color eyes they have and all of that. Well, this time I used some people that I knew, and one of them was my daughter, and one of them was a great guy with a great sport by the name of Daniel. And I'm going to put a link up tomorrow revealing. I have a blogger called Relz RELZ Reviews, and you could go to that now, and you'll see who I based my characters on. So I think that about wraps it up. I think we are ready to, let's see. Oh, looky here. We've got a winner for our mini iPads. Are you ready? I should have had a drum roll. The winner of our grand prize iPad mini is Yvonne Hooker of Kalamazoo, Michigan. So that's awesome. She's in Michigan. Congratulations, Yvonne. I'm so excited for you. And if those of you who are in the chat area and you participated and you saw some gift card winners scroll by but you weren't sure if you were one of them, I'm going to be posting a comprehensive link of all the winners up on my Facebook page and on my website. So you can go to iwantherbook.com for my website, and you'll see that link there. And you can see me on Facebook at facebook.com/D's Friends, and that's DEES Friends. And then you'll see that comprehensive list I'll send you a link to the comprehensive list of winners so you'll know if you are one so that you can claim it. So congratulations to all those winners. Thank you so much for coming. I had a wonderful time. Please come and see me. And if you asked a question and you didn't get answered, well, just post it on my Facebook page or email me on my website, and I'll be happy to answer those. I love hearing from you. So until then, good night and happy reading. I had a really good time.